All right, welcome back. And now it's time for another episode of Generations Reflecting on Lifestyles, where we react to modern content creators discussing about life today, comparing how it was in the past, specifically in the 80s and 90s, but it could be even earlier, and compare them with the realities and emotional atmospheres of those decades compared to this time. And tonight we are reacting to a video from the channel Big War the Genius. If you want to pass by to check it out, his channel. The video is called Staying on One Job for Decades and Retiring is a Thing of the Past, and opens an affirmation and question mark to live for your own thought, whether that is a question or an affirmation. So let's listen for a few seconds and I will review later overall the main ideas discussed in this video.
Good evening, good people, family. Getting drunk, and it's not me. I don't drink. Y'all can have it. And again, thank y'all. I really, really, really appreciate y'all's support. I thank y'all for your email topic, for taking. Thank you for your patience. I didn't know it was going to be like this when I gave my, saying I'm going to do email topic. I didn't think I was going to have 200-300 subscribers, to be honest. Team. Made it as a walk-on, but I ain't had no money. But, back then I wasn't, when I'm kind of, but I made the team is what I'm saying. Didn't have no money, couldn't stay in school. So, Alabama State University. Montgomery, Alabama. Coach Matthews was the coach at the time. And I was like, shit, cause that's when the Dallas Cowboys was, it was back in the night when the Dallas Cowboys was the ish. They went Emmitt Smith and all them boys winning them champions, Super Bowls or whatever. And I
Sorry that I had missed the part in which
same how in dating people
the
have that grass is greener syndrome. This can also go into how you said in your previous video that we all got burnt out on life at some point in time. But life doesn't give a F about our feelings. And he also said he don't want to be an entrepreneur. That's off the table. Well, that's going to pretty much, by that being off the table, young man, unless you go back to college or trade school for something that, whatever it is that you love, cause it ain't that you lack discipline. You hate what you're doing. You're job hopping because you hate what you're doing. You ain't gonna hop from a job you love. And
all right, talking about in this video he's talking about job hopping and modern work culture, retirement, AI, and why so many people today feel disconnected from the work they do. There is what he was talking about in that moment. I couldn't find it. I forgot to mark the exact timestamp, but you can check it out directly in his channel, Big War the Genius. I will leave a link in the description. And one thing I liked immediately about the video is that Big War does not begin by attacking younger generations. He argues that most job hopping today is not really about lack of discipline. but about people genuinely hating the work they do. And I think many adults quietly relate to that. One of the strongest moments in the video is when he describes bad jobs almost like a prison you technically have the freedom to leave. And that's psychologically a very powerful metaphor. But because many people today feel trapped between financial survival and emotional exhaustion. And Big Word basically says people in actual prison cannot leave, but workers can leave. So they job hop trying to escape environments they psychologically can't stand anymore. And that explains modern work culture much better than simply saying young people are lazy. Now, comparing this to the 80s and 90s becomes very interesting because during those decades, many people also hated aspects of their jobs factories, offices, industrial work, repetitive labor. But there was often a stronger feeling that staying long term would eventually produce stability through pensions, home ownership, retirement, predictable life structure. So psychologically, many people tolerated difficult work because they still believed that the sacrifice was leading somewhere. And that's one of the biggest differences today, honestly. Big War also talks about how the era of working at one plant for 30 or 40 years and retiring comfortably is mostly disappearing. And I think younger generations increasingly feel that reality. Companies restructure constantly now, automation increases, AI grows, overseas outsourcing expands. And Big World specifically mentions how companies increasingly look for cheaper labor, automation, and AI replacement. And that creates a completely different psychological atmosphere around work, because work no longer feels permanent. And another thing Big Word says that I thought was very important is that the main reason many adults stay in jobs they despise is responsibility. Children, bills, families, mortgages. And that's true. He basically argues that younger adults without those responsibilities are more likely to leave bad jobs because they still have the flexibility to escape. And that creates an interesting contrast between freedom and stability, because previous generations often had more stability but less flexibility. And one of the best points in the video is when he says, "You retire from a career, not a job." And psychologically, that sentence explains why many people today feel disoriented. Because many adults no longer feel they are building towards something stable. They feel like maintaining survival continuously. And that creates burnout, detachment, and emotional exhaustion. And Big Ward also talks about his own experience in tracking, saying that when people actually love what they do, showing up every day no longer requires massive discipline. And I think there's truth to that psychologically too, because meaningful activity naturally produces more motivation, more engagement, and more psychological energy. Human beings tolerate hard work much better when they feel purpose, identity, or pride inside it. And something many jobs during the 80s and 90s still had more of was identity. The mechanic felt like a mechanic, the truck driver felt like a truck driver, the radio host felt like a radio host. You you understand my point? And people often emotionally connected more strongly to what they did daily. But modern work increasingly feels more abstract with dashboards, metrics, platforms, algorithms, remote systems, and many people no longer feel physically connected to what they produce. And the AI discussion changes the psychology of work enormously now, because during the 80s and 90s, technology often felt associated with progress, opportunity, and excitement. But now many people increasingly associate technology with replacement, and that uncertainty affects motivation because it becomes harder to emotionally commit to paths that feel unstable. But the part I appreciated most in the video is that despite all the frustration, Big Word still emphasizes that trying things, trying new things, learning skills, entrepreneurship, and persistence. He talks about failing many times, trying different things, and eventually finding success. Not in the first try, maybe, but getting it after many tries. And I think modern adults increasingly need that mindset because the future may no longer be one single predictable lifelong track as it used to be. Now it may involve multiple reinventions. It's not necessarily what we would like or choose willingly, but it's what we have. It's what I tell you at the end of each episode. Remember to do what you can with what you have. And now what we all have in this working environment is this, the necessity of multiple reinventions. And maybe that's the biggest psychological difference between the work culture of the 80s and 90s and today. Previous generations often expected stability first, while modern generations increasingly expect adaptation. And that can feel frightening, but it also creates possibilities older generations sometimes never had. People can now build independent projects, learn online, work remotely, combine multiple skills, or reinvent themselves much more easily. So maybe the challenge of modern adulthood is not simply finding one permanent identity, but learning how to remain human and purposeful and psychologically grounded inside the constantly changing world. All right, everyone, that's been tonight's segment. generation reflecting on lifestyles with modern work culture addressing job instability and the changing meaning of careers. So after our favorite brief recess music and break, we continue our journey through the 80s and 90s with our segment Tools for These Times.